Liz Pelly's Mood Machine is just one of the most insightful critiques of Spotify I've ever read. And here's the thing, it's not really a book about music streaming. It's a book about how a single platform totally reshaped our culture, our creativity, and even our emotional lives. Pelly's argument is that Spotify has kind of quietly turned music from this expressive art form into, well, a frictionless tool for managing our emotions. A soundtrack for being more productive, for calming down, for optimizing ourselves.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at this idea of sound tracking the self. Then, we'll dive into what Pelly calls the mood revolution. After that, we'll explore the sound of compliance and then get into the really sticky stuff, listening as surveillance. We'll also unpack the playlist economy, and finally, we'll talk about reclaiming music.
So, to really get a handle on Spotify's impact, we have to start at the beginning with its pretty ambitious goal, to soundtrack the self.
And this quote, it just perfectly captures the whole point of the book. It's all about how a platform reshaped culture, creativity, and emotional life.
Pelly starts by getting us to see Spotify differently. It's not just a music service, she says. It's a behavior-shaping platform. Think about their early marketing slogans: soundtrack your life, music for every moment. Right from the start, this was a company that wanted to weave itself into the very rhythm of our daily emotional lives.
She actually takes us back to Spotify's roots in Sweden, where it was first pitched as this elegant solution to music piracy. But as the company got bigger and bigger, its mission, well, it changed. It stopped being about giving you access to all the music in the world and started being about giving you access to moods. The whole design of the platform, all those endless rows of playlists for different activities and feelings, it suddenly teaches us a new way to listen. Music isn't something you actively choose anymore. It's something that gets assigned to a moment.
And this shift, Pelly argues, is a huge turning point. It's the start of a whole new era where music becomes more than just art. It becomes our emotional infrastructure.
And at the core of all this is a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. Spotify wants to be the invisible emotional operating system of modern life.
Now, you can see this ambition most clearly in what Pelly calls the mood revolution, which is this fundamental change that basically turns our feelings into products.
This chapter is really the heart of the book. Pelly just dissects the whole phenomenon of mood playlists. You know the ones: chill, focus, life sucks, deep sleep, confidence boost, and hundreds more. What these playlists do is they take the incredible complexity of human emotion and just flatten it into these neat, tidy, marketable categories.
She shows how Spotify's editors and their algorithms work together to create this taxonomy of feelings that really has more to do with corporate priorities than actual human experience. The goal here isn't emotional depth, it's predictability. Any tracks that are too intense or too experimental or just too emotionally disruptive, they get filtered out. And what you're left with is a new kind of music consumption. It's emotionally neutral, it's algorithmically optimized, and it's just this endlessly looping background sound. Which leads us to a pretty powerful and, honestly, a kind of unsettling idea. Mood playlists turn emotions into product categories and music into emotional wallpaper. So this flattening of our emotions has a really big impact on our lives, especially when it comes to work and productivity. And that brings us to what Pelly calls the sound of compliance. Here, Pelly really zooms in on Spotify's whole focus ecosystem. All those playlists designed to help us work harder and longer and more quietly. She directly connects this to the rise of hustle culture, self-optimization, and the whole corporate wellness industry. Now, Spotify presents itself as this helpful, neutral tool for managing your attention and regulating your mood. But Pelly argues that it's not neutral at all. It actually reflects a world where we, as workers, are just expected to manage our own emotions to stay productive. So music becomes a tool for emotional compliance. She even draws these parallels to things like modern office design, mindfulness apps, and corporate wellness programs. They all encourage us to internalize the responsibility for our own stress. So the key takeaway here is pretty clear. Spotify's productivity playlists reinforce a culture where our emotions are managed for efficiency, not for expression. And this culture of compliance is actually reinforced by the sound of the music Spotify promotes. The platform rewards tracks that are short, low energy, instantly recognizable, loop-friendly, and emotionally muted. And what does this lead to? The rise of Spotify core, a genre that's not defined by what an artist intended, but by what an algorithm prefers. Pelly shows how artists are now literally tailoring their music just to fit into these mood playlists. It creates this feedback loop where the platform's taste becomes the industry's taste. She also digs into the rise of so-called fake artists, these anonymous producers who just churn out ambient or lo-fi tracks to fill up playlists as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And this all points to a really powerful realization. Spotify doesn't just distribute music, it engineers a whole new sonic aesthetic.
But the implications of Spotify's influence go even deeper than that, right into the very nature of our relationship with music and with data. And this brings us to a much darker side of the story: listening as surveillance.
So here, Pelly pulls back the curtain on Spotify's real business model: data extraction. Every single skip, every replay, every time you add a song to a playlist, every mood you select, it all becomes part of a behavioral profile. And then Spotify partners with advertisers, with brands, and even with political campaigns to sell insights into our emotional states. She argues that mood playlists aren't just emotional tools for us, they're data funnels for them. So by choosing a chill playlist or a Life Sucks playlist, we're revealing really intimate emotional information that can then be monetized. And Spotify's annual Wrapped campaign, it's a perfect example of this. It's this fun, colorful celebration of our listening habits that also, almost sneakily, normalizes surveillance. The takeaway here is, well, it's pretty chilling. Spotify's personalization is powered by emotional surveillance. Now, this whole data-driven approach has a huge impact on the music industry itself, which brings us to the economics of this new playlist era. Pelly shifts her focus to the economics of streaming and shows how Spotify's payment model really puts independent musicians at a disadvantage. It uses this pro-rata system, which basically funnels most of the money toward the most streamed tracks, creating a winner-take-all economy.
And these mood playlists, they concentrate power even more by giving Spotify total editorial control over what gets heard. So you have the major labels negotiating for coveted playlist spots while independent artists really struggle to break through. She also points out the rise of these background music factories, companies that just produce cheap, anonymous tracks specifically designed to fill playlists and capture streams.
The result of this whole economic model is a music industry that rewards conformity, scale, and disposability, not creativity. And the consequences of this go way beyond artists' paychecks. They completely reshape our entire culture of listening. Pelly argues that Spotify's design just encourages us to be passive listeners. Autoplay, algorithmic radio, mood playlists, they all reduce the need for us to make an intentional choice. All those rituals that used to define music culture, like digging through crates, listening to a whole album, discovering new bands through your community, they're being replaced by these personalized feeds that just isolate us in our own little algorithmic bubbles. Music becomes a background utility instead of a cultural force.
The takeaway here is pretty stark. Frictionless listening leads to cultural flattening and emotional numbness.
But, and this is important, Pelly doesn't just leave us in this state of doom and gloom. In her final section, she actually offers a path forward, a way we might be able to reclaim music from the platform's grip.
Pelly ends on a note of hope. She shines a light on all these artists, labels, and communities that are building alternatives. Things like Bandcamp's artist-centric model, community radio stations, DIY scenes, cooperative streaming experiments, local music journalism, and these amazing listener-driven discovery communities.
She argues that for any meaningful change to happen, we have to recenter human relationships in music culture. Music should be a social, expressive, and communal force, not just a background soundtrack engineered by some tech giant. And this all leads to a really powerful call to action. The future of music depends on reclaiming listening from platforms. So after all that, what does Mood Machine really teach us? Well, Liz Pelly's book is both a warning and a call to action. It shows how Spotify didn't just reshape the music industry, but the very emotional and cultural fabric of how we listen. The book argues that Spotify turns our emotions into categories, it turns artists into data suppliers, it turns listeners into behavioral profiles, and it turns music into a productivity tool. But, and this is the hopeful part, it also insists that alternatives are out there, and that we as listeners, artists, and communities can still reclaim the meaning of music. Which really leaves us with a final question to think about. How can we, listeners, artists, and communities, reclaim the meaning of music?